Let's turn now to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 8. Continuing our study in these Beatitudes, we see here Jesus speaking about another characteristic of those who possess the kingdom of heaven and who are his true disciples. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The emphasis here is on purity of heart, as opposed to the Old Covenant requirement of purity externally. When we read in Romans 8:3 that the law could not do something, this is what the law could not do. It could not bring a man to purity on the inside. It could only keep people pure on the outside, their external life measured up to God's requirements. The law could prevent a man from committing murder or adultery and keep him clean on the outside so that his external testimony was good. But it couldn't do anything about a man if he had a dirty thought or an evil thought or a wrong attitude towards someone, because the law was incapable of handling that type of thing or helping a person to overcome that. And that's why we read that the Old Covenant was not good enough and has been abolished. We read in Hebrews chapter 8, and a new covenant has been established. And as we read in Romans 8:3, God has now been able to do within us, Romans 8:3 and 4, what the law could not do. That the righteousness of this law can now be fulfilled inside us so that we can have purity in our hearts. And this is the blessing of the new covenant. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. To see God was one of the greatest privileges. To speak to him face to face under the Old Covenant. In Deuteronomy and chapter 34 we read about Moses. Deuteronomy 34:10, that among all the prophets in Israel at that time, there had no prophet risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The Lord himself says that in Numbers and chapter 12, when Aaron and Miriam criticized Moses. We read here that the Lord appeared to all three of them and said, "Hear now my words." Numbers 12 verse 6. "If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision or in a dream. But not so with my servant Moses, who is more than the other prophets. With him I don't speak in visions and dreams. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings." So we see that to speak to the Lord face to face is a greater privilege than having visions and dreams from the Lord. And this is something that we need to recognize in our day when many people are excited about visions and dreams. Far greater than that is to be able to speak to the Lord face to face. In the Old Testament tabernacle there was a veil that covered up the most holy place within which God dwelt. And if anyone were to enter into that place, they would die. But now under the new covenant, that veil has been rent, and we can enter in and have fellowship with the Father face to face. So we see that that privilege which was reserved for the rare person like Moses in the Old Covenant is now open to all. It's not just for one or two here and there. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. They can come before him if we have purity of heart. Now we can say that purity of heart means more than just having a good conscience. To have a clean conscience is to be free from known sin. In other words, every sin that I know, I have confessed and forsaken and given up, repented of, and I have a clean conscience. But to have a pure heart means more than that, in the sense that I have nothing in my heart but God, no desire in my heart for anything or anyone other than God. That is purity of heart. Just like the psalmist said in Psalm 73 in verse 25, he said, "Whom have I in heaven but thee? And there's nothing on earth that I desire beside thee." That is more than a clean conscience. There are many people who have a clean conscience, who are living with a good conscience before God and men, who still desire some things on earth, not evil things. If they desired evil things, they would have a bad conscience. But good things. For example, a man can have an ambition to be a great scientist. A person who is a student can have an ambition to become something big in the world. Not evil, a good ambition as far as the world is concerned. But such a person cannot say he has a pure heart. A person can have an ambition to possess property and travel and see places. There's nothing wrong with these things. But a person who has such desires in his heart cannot say his heart is pure. A person who has a pure heart is one who can say, in the words of that psalmist, as we just read in Psalm 73:25, "There is nothing that I desire on earth beside thee." I do not desire to be a great scientist. I do not desire to advance in my profession. I do not desire property. I do not desire to travel to see sights in the world, or I do not desire anything. In other words, God is everything to him. And this is what it means to be free from New Testament idols. In the Old Testament, idols were external. Physical objects made of wood or stone, or gold or silver. In the New Covenant, idolatry can be more subtle. One's ambition in one's profession can be an idol. Your wife can be an idol. Your children can be idols for you. For a student, his studies can become an idol, so that God takes second place. A person's profession can be his idol. A person's house or some other possession that he has at home can be an idol. It's one thing to give up evil things. It's another thing to give up good things, which God wants us to give up. And we can say that these are two levels in the Christian life. We live at a good conscience at one level. To live with a pure heart is to live at a higher level. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 12, he says, "All things are lawful, but not all things are profitable." We can say that there are two levels. When I give up all unlawful things, I get a clear conscience, a good conscience. When I give up even lawful things which are not profitable, which are not for the glory of God, I get a pure heart. And that's at a higher level than a good conscience. And the Lord's inviting us to live with a pure heart and not just with a good conscience. In other words, to be free from inward idolatry. We can take an illustration from the Old Testament to make this clearer. Abraham, we read, had two sons. One was Ishmael and one was Isaac. As we read in Galatians 4, these are symbolic of two covenants. One the Old Covenant, the other the New Covenant. Ishmael was born outside the will of God. And we can say that when he gave up Ishmael, he gave up that which was the product of the workings of the flesh. That's symbolic of a person who has a good conscience. In Genesis 21, we read, God told Abraham to give up Ishmael and send him away, and he never saw him again for the rest of his life. But then came a higher test in Genesis 22, where God told Abraham to give up Isaac. That was a far greater test, because Isaac was God-given. He was the product, we can say, of the Spirit, not of the flesh. To give up that which is legitimate, when God tells us to give it up, is the test of whether we are pure in heart. For example, think if you have a spiritual ministry, say a ministry of healing or preaching or teaching or serving or anything. That can become an idol to you, and then your heart is no longer pure. There are people who sing for the Lord, as they say, but their singing is an idol. They're seeking their own honor. If God were to ask them to give it up, they'd be very reluctant to give it up. That was the test that Abraham faced on Mount Moriah, and he passed. So we see that To be pure in heart is to be totally free from all idols. Take a test, for example. Supposing you lose some money, either through being pickpocketed or in some other way. Do you lose some joy as well? If so, it must indicate that our joy was a little bit in our money. God wants to bring us to the place where our joy is in God alone. In God alone. And in no one else. That is to be pure in heart, where I have no joy in anything on earth, only in God. Only in God. To be pure in heart means to have a heart that is filled and satisfied with God Himself, that has no attachment to anything earthly, that has forsaken and been detached from all earthly things, possessions, people, etc. And now we find our satisfaction, our joy, and everything in God alone. Such people can live in a face-to-face relationship with God on earth, just like Moses did, and in a far greater level under the new covenant. This is our birthright. May we enter into it.